Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind Movies and Shows, where we discuss movies and shows from a broad-scale Christian humanities framework. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. Hey there, and welcome to the first full episode of the Mythic Mind Movies and Shows podcast. You may have already noticed that we're on episode 2 here, and I've already changed our theme music. I wasn't really sold on the first one. I felt like it, I was kind of going with that Hollywood cinema feel, but I feel like, as we're engaging with ideas, engaging in philosophy, engaging with the humanities, engaging with serious things while still having fun, I felt like something a little bit heavier was in line for what we're doing. And so I mixed it up. We've changed us to Jupiter by Gustav Holst. Not for any particular philosophical reason, other than I just kind of feel like it generally fits the mood of what we're doing here for the most part. But anyways, today we are going to be continuing our broad-reaching Star Wars series that has started over on the main Mythic Mind podcast and has splintered off into a few different directions. And so over on the main show, we started off with just a general group discussion on Star Wars at large. We've done A New Hope, we've done Knights of the Old Republic 1, and then from there we splintered off to the Mythic Mind Games podcast, where we continued on with Knights of the Old Republic 2 and the Old Republic, the MMO game. And then we've done some more non-Star Wars-y stuff over there already. And then over here, this is where the movies are going to be talked about moving forward as we work through the rest of the Star Wars movies with Empire Strikes Back today. In a couple of weeks, we'll get to Return of the Jedi, and then we'll go on from there through all the movies. We may end up doing some of the shows. I don't know. I haven't committed to that yet. I think that the movies will take us long enough, and by the time we get to the end, we'll figure out where we want to go from there. But this podcast is moving forward for as long as it runs, which hopefully is a very long time. We'll just be taking a general Christian humanities approach to movies and shows. Now, if you would like to participate in this conversation, and fortunately, we had a pretty good number of participants join us from the Mythic Mind Fellowship today. Had 6 or 7 or so, and so that's I mentioned that in the conversation. That one kind of cool thing about this group dynamic that we're doing is we have, at this point, over 60 patrons, 60 members of the Mythic Mind Fellowship. And so you never really know exactly who's going to show up, what combination of people we're going to get. It's a fluid group. I'm grateful for our core group, but I'm also grateful for those who kind of come and go as they're able. So it's a good group. And if you would like to become part of this, you want to join any of these conversations we're having across the main Mythic Mind podcast, the Mythic Mind Games podcast, or the Mythic Mind Movies and Shows podcast. You want to be part of any of those conversations, become a patron over at patreon.com/mythicmind. Becoming just a tier 1, $5 a month patron will allow you to have full Discord access and will give you open invitation to any of these shows, any of these conversations that suits your fancy. And of course, if you want to become a patron at a higher rank, then that'll come with additional perks, and we'll just further support what we're doing here. And so, if you enjoy this show, you want to see it keep going on for a long time to come, then I welcome your patronage. I welcome your getting involved in this community. But for now, let's go ahead and just jump right into our conversation on The Empire Strikes Back. Welcome to our next Mythic Mind episode in the Star Wars series as we talk about The Empire Strikes Back. Now, this is really a fun group to work with because we have over, at this point of recording, like over 60 people that are in some way affiliated with this Mythic Mind group. I mean, some are silent patrons, some are more active than others, some kind of come and go. And that just makes it very interesting to me because we always get these different mashups of different people coming into this. And so some of these voices are going to sound very familiar to you if you've been listening to recent content. David's been on for most of the Star Wars stuff. Ian's been on for all the Star Wars stuff. Jordan's there for the first one. Amy was on the Fellowship podcast before once or twice, which I think got merged into the main podcast. And she wrote a great series of Substack articles for us. And so I'll link all that stuff. And then David is with us for the first time. And so since nobody here has, at least, I mean, unless you know it from otherwise, he has heard his voice. And so, David, why don't you just briefly introduce yourself?
I am Pastor David Walsh of Pilgrim Lutheran Church in Buffalo, New York. Um, I discovered Mythic Mind actually through my wife, who has been following you on Twitter for a little bit now, anyways. And so uh, we started watching your videos on the Ransom trilogy, and yeah, decided I liked your work, and thought I'd support you in any way we could. And Star Wars is absolutely something that I love. I was 7 um, in '97 when I was introduced to the original trilogy, and my generation considers the prequel trilogies part of actual Star Wars. Um, uh, but uh, but yeah, happy to be here and love me some Star Wars talk.
Well, good, fantastic. Welcome aboard. And yeah, I guess I mean, there's a connection here in that you're brought in through the ransom stuff, and so I mean we're in space, or I guess the heavens, right? And so there's a good carryover connection there. I think I would like to, just as we usually do, kind of go around the room and just tell me briefly, kind of whatever you want to say about your experience with this movie in particular. I mean, The Empire Strikes Back is definitely a fan favorite. It's usually at the top of the list for best Star Wars, or at least it's very close. And so I'd love to just hear a little bit from you just to kick us off. Like, what about this movie makes it one of the top tier films? Like, what is so compelling about this movie? And I'll just go around here. Jordan, why don't you kick us off?
So I count myself as one who says that Empire is the best of the three Star Wars movies. I almost said Star Trek. Sorry. Um, and I think it's a combination of things. Um, I will say that I love the Hoth sequence, like the whole thing beginning to end. I remember like early on when like Star Wars video games started to be really good, as opposed to like the stuff that you had on Atari way back in the day, where you actually got to fly the speeders around and trip up the Imperial walkers. And I just thought that whole thing was really cool. I was afraid of the Wampas as a kid. Just because they're terrifying. And I remember is the 64 game Shadows of the Empire. Does that sound? David's giving me the nod. Okay, those things, they would chase you. And I mean, even I was probably 12, 13 when that came out. And I mean, even then, I did not like that at all. They were, it was just such a scary thing for adolescent me. But I think part of it in terms of the overarching story is that it really starts to. I think I said this in the New Hope podcast that we did. It really starts Luke's descent into a darker side of the Force, where we're starting to get Darth Vader also in full flower, as he's going to make his completion over to the right side of the Force, I guess you could say. And I think the overarching story of the whole thing, that the development of Luke's character, from this kind of naive farm kid to a guy who gets very close to falling from what is good and true and beautiful, really comes out well in this movie. So that's it for me.
Yeah, and well, I guess okay. I'll hold off my thoughts. I want to hear from everybody first. Ian, you can go next. Tell us something about what makes this a great movie.
Well, I will say that Empire Strikes Back has never been my favorite of the movies, even though I would agree that it is the most technically skilled of the movies. Um, if you look at the way, and it's easiest to use one character, but if you look at the way Darth Vader is framed and lit, it is radically different than the way he's framed and lit in both A New Hope and Return of the Jedi. He's a lot sort of dustier. There's a lot more. They don't take the care to polish his helmet and his faceplate the way they do, and he's often framed against very dark things. So he seems like a black skull mask emanating from dark things. Whereas in A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, he's often just, kind of against some gray or white, which gives a lot of contrast, but he's terrifying. Like visually, emotionally terrifying in just the way that Irving Kershner and his director of photography lit and framed and shot him. And I think that all the lighting, the choices of yellow and orange, and the Bespin scenes, the lightsaber fight in the carbonite freezing chamber, the framing of Luke's fall as he realizes that everything he's built his emotional and spiritual beliefs upon have crumbled. He falls into that shaft, like the symbolic resonance there is just a lot more carefully thought out than it is in the other two movies. Not that, I mean, George Lucas and Richard Marquand definitely did think about these things, but I think Irving Kershner was able to really get them to another level with the skill he has as a filmmaker and storyteller. So I think that's partly why Empire Strikes Back really sticks with a lot of people and is a lot of people's favorite, because it's on another level skill wise.
Now, I have not studied the filmography, like the technical aspects of any of this. So, I mean, that's very interesting for me to hear. Do you think there's anything particularly about the story of this movie that that calls for those kinds of aesthetics, that kind of technicality?
I think when you're digging deeper into the spirituality and the growth of the characters, I mean, Luke goes through, as I said, a complete crumbling, and so that's something that I think demands that the audience kind of grow up a bit. Like a story where Luke discovers that his father was a Jedi and he can use the Force and he can blow up the evil fortress in the Death Star. That's kind of a story that anyone can relate to, whether you're 3 years old or you're 100. A story where you find out that the person who told you that your father was a Jedi lied to you, and your father is in fact a mass murdering um, dictator who wants to recruit you to kill his boss. Like, I think that demands a more adult response, a more mature response. And so I think that the technical aspects are part of why that needed to be in this second movie.
No, I mean, to defend Obi-Wan, I mean, he told the truth from a certain point of view.
Obi-Wan is a liar.
I mean, in a certain sense, but I I particularly latch onto when you described Vader's aesthetics here, almost like an apparition, kind of that shadow feel, which very much feeds into the Jungian dimensions that are underplaying this film. I mean, in fact, like on Dagobah, when Luke is having this vision of fighting Vader, and then he takes off the mask and it's himself. Like Vader is the shadow of Luke. He is what Luke could be if he let himself fall from substance. And so that. Like I said, I never really paid that much attention to those technical details, but I think that definitely does add to the philosophical dimensions of what's going on in this particular story. So that is very interesting to me. You'll come back to some of that. David, tell us something about what makes this a great movie.
I didn't expect for Ian to basically steal a lot of what I was thinking, but I'm glad to know that I'm not the only person who has felt that way about that because I was on a 12-hour flight in not a very comfortable seat last fall, and I was trying to sleep, and I was like, I'm just going to put on there's Empire Strike Back on the TV on the back of the seat in front of me. I know it by heart. I'm not even going to plug my headphones in, and I just kind of listened to music and watched the movie. And that's a good way to take in the design, the composition, and the lighting and the set design of movies is to just without the audio, watch it. And yeah, the lighting through the whole film is just incredible. Irvin Kershner. Um, I'm not sure the movie, I mean, it was still everything about the movie is great, but I can't imagine what it'd have been like without him directing it. just when they're walking through the hallways, Han and Leia at the beginning, they're walking in and out of the shadows. They're having an argument, and their faces aren't even lit. There's a lot of places where people are in silhouette, and the orange glow of the carbonite chamber, and the the stark color differences from the white of Hoth and the green of Dagobah, and then the orange of Cloud City. I just always loved it. All the lighting seems real and lived in, whereas in A New Hope, like, you think about as they walk all around the Death Star, it's just almost like stage lighting. Everyone is fully lit on their face. And like, Clash of the Titans, which to me, when I watch it, it looks like something out of the 1960s. It seems really old, and Zeus is sitting there with fog and laser lights shining out from behind his head and things. That movie came out a year after The Empire Strikes Back, and it doesn't hold up. I mean, it's still fun to watch, but like the special effects aren't believable, even though Harryhausen, I think he did great work. But um, I don't know, Empire Strikes Back just everything about it works wonderfully. And I saw it at the theater and at the drive-in theater and stuff. I had an uncle at the time who he loved it as well, and so we just went to see it a whole bunch, and I always loved it. And I mentioned before that I spent 3 years wondering if Darth Vader was really telling Luke the truth, that how could that possibly be that he was his father. But yeah, that's basically all I've got.
I wish I could relate to that, that wonder of the mystery. Unfortunately, by the time I've seen it, I mean, I assume I already knew the answer. I don't know. I can't remember my first time watching the series. It's just kind of always been there. But uh, that wonder does remind me. I recently saw a clip of I think it was Mark Hamill. I'm pretty sure it was. He was talking about why Vader was burned at the end of Return of the Jedi, and he said it was basically just to confirm to the fans he's actually dead. He said that's the primary reason why they went that route. But I guess we've been conditioned to always accept open-ended mysteries, especially so I suppose in the comic book movie era, where nobody stays dead.
For sure.
Right. Amy, what makes this a good movie, or whatever you want to say about it?
It's interesting that, a few people have already mentioned what a great job Kirshner does on this. And that's true because I just yesterday was watching some of it for the first time in years. I mean, I saw it many times younger, but then, life has happened and it's been a long time since I watched it. I put it up on, now our big HD screen that I wouldn't have had the first time. And wow, it looks like $1 million still. Other than, some of the effects, okay, that they're 1980, but actually, like when they're coming into Cloud City, that looks amazing. There are a couple shots that really stood out to me, where there's one where Han Solo on the planet Hoth has just gone to look for Luke, who's, frozen. This not frozen in carbonite, but frozen in ice. And it's too late in the day. They have to close the doors, and as the doors are coming down, you hear that sound, that groan of the doors, that it just gives you the pay your stomach. And the camera just zooms in on Leia slowly as her eyes are getting big, and it is such a muddy shot. And then a couple people have already mentioned the carbonite freezing chamber in Cloud City, and the way that Darth Vader is lit. And the first time that Luke sees him there, it's got that orange glow in the background, and you just see almost more than you see any details. You just see the outline of Darth Vader. And they have a couple times in this film where there's another time later on in that incredible lightsaber duel they have, which I still think is the best lightsaber duel in any of the Star Wars films, even though it doesn't have nearly the tricks that they have now. Just the way it's shot and what you're feeling emotionally is just so much more powerful, it seems to me. But that, there's another time where Luke's walking down a hallway and Darth Vader just appears like out of nowhere. And I did feel like, wow, his physical presence is so much more powerful in this film than it was in New Hope, really, than it is in Return of the Jedi. which is starting to feel to me like a really 80s film in some ways. But it, what a big risk for them to take after the success of the first film, which is basically just a popcorn film. Okay, it's a space opera like we've been having for years. It's a lot like Dune. It's a lot like I think Flash Gordon was another that George Lucas had been reading. So it's not really reinventing the wheel. There's maybe a couple elements that are unique, but it's more just the big spectacle of the effects. And we're just starting to have summer blockbusters be a thing. We had Jaws, and now this is kind of the second big summer blockbuster. And they decide, as a sequel to that, to come back with this really complicated, completely different in tone film. And I wanted to look up, I'm like, what has Irvin Kershner done other than this film? And really, mostly like some television. And he had no other film that was anywhere like on this level of acclaim. And so I looked up the guy who did the cinematographer, and again, he did the Rocky Horror Picture Show, but there wasn't like some other big huge sci-fi film that he had done. It looks like several people they kind of peaked with this. But what's very interesting to me is the writing for this film because it's also the best written Star Wars film. So the first initial draft was written by a woman named Lee Brackett, who was just about the most famous female writer of the golden age of science fiction. And she had for years been writing science fiction, and she did a few, some screenplays, but mostly fiction. And she got into some other areas of fiction as well. And she died like before they could even get any further into any of the real production. And George Lucas read her script, and he's like, this is not right at all. This is not. So I think the one thing I was reading that she came up with was the idea of like going to the training in Dagobah. Well, he wasn't called Yoda at that time, but that kind of concept of going off and doing that. So that was her contribution. But so then George Lucas said, well, I don't have much time left because, he was kind of got her to finish this and now she's died and they only have a few months before filming starts. So he's like, I'm going to write a new draft myself. He pretty much completely starts over. And he's now able to add some things like the fact that Darth Vader is Luke's father, which of course doesn't go in the typed script, but it goes in like the official script that he has. And then he's also at the same time he's working on producing Empire Strikes Back. He's putting together Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first Indiana Jones film. They're in the pre-production for that. And he's got this guy who, unlike Lee Brackett, who was at the end of her writing career, Lawrence Kasdan, who's like a very new beginning screenwriter, who's written a treatment for Raiders of the Lost Ark for him. And Kasdan turns this into George Lucas and says, here, do you want to read my script for Raiders of the Lost Ark? And George Lucas is like, you know what? I don't even need to read it. I have a gut feeling about you. Here, take Empire Strikes Back and rewrite it because I'm not doing a good job. So this guy, Lawrence, he comes in and like a few months completely, he writes it as we have it now. And so in back-to-back years, he wrote The Empire Strikes Back and The Raiders of the Lost Ark, which are, two of the greatest like action sci-fi classic American films. And I think, wow, what a 2-year run that was for him as the beginning screenwriter. Empire Strikes Back was his very first screen credit. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing. But I will say, in some ways, this film succeeded too much because it made us now expect that Star Wars films are going to be on that high technical art kind of level. We're all wanting to get back to what we had in Empire Strikes Back. And actually, Star Wars was only originally going to be like a popcorn flick kind of thing. And now we're trying to bring in, all this drama and all these layers of mythology. And I feel like some of the continual dissatisfaction that the fans feel every time something comes out never lives up to their standards, is because we're trying to get back to Empire Strikes Back. Even Return of the Jedi, a lot of people followed with like kind of a disappointment compared to this one. So I don't know. I think maybe we need to take each thing as its own thing and not try to make it this other thing that was like a flash in a bottle that we're never going to be able to exactly reproduce that formula again.
I don't know. Are you really a Star Wars fan if you're not continually disappointed? I think that's just part of the
Not at
territory.
this point, no.
That's super interesting. I don't know all this history of what happened behind the scenes, and it's just so interesting to hear about how things have developed to bring us this project from a fairly new writer. Like it's quite the way to start off your career. Interesting. All right, Reverend David, tell us something about this film, whatever you want to say about what makes it great.
I'll say this to start off. As I said earlier, I was 7 when I watched the original 3, so I wasn't really concerned at that time with the visuals or really critiquing the story of any of those films, or really any of the first 6 in my younger years. From that sense, the things that always drew me to Star Wars was, I'm going to say it, the action part of those movies, seeing a Death Star get blown up twice, seeing lightsaber battles. And I like how Amy qualified her lightsaber statement with the best of the movies. Um, um, because there is a lightsaber fight in Rebels that is very short that I think is the best lightsaber fight. Um, but when you go back to watch it as somebody older than 7, the thing that always drew me uh, to Empire and Return of the Jedi is how that theme of family gets ratcheted up in each of those movies. Even before, spoiler, the reveal of Vader as Luke's father, he leaves the training in Dagobah. Why? Well, because his new family, part of which was always his family and he just didn't know, is in trouble. And it is this thing that is most important, and you still see the failure of the Republic era Jedi still alive in Yoda and Obi-Wan. Which is a side note, there's way too much Obi-Wan slander in the Star Wars community for my liking. But that's a whole other thing. But they still feel like that those attachments were probably the most dangerous part of falling to the dark side. That if you're too attached to the people that you love, you're gonna fall to the dark side, and you're just gonna bring far greater evil. And yet the thing I always loved about Luke is that he saw past that. And in fact, that was the thing that always connected him to the light side of the Force, those that he loved. And there's a very, very much a biblical theme, within that. We all love our families. We all love our friends, because the faith guides us to look outside of ourselves, and these vocations that we have are the things that motivate us to get better at the various things that life calls us to do. It motivates us to drop whatever we're doing and love on a friend or a family member. And the faith guides us to try and find the good even in someone who seems the furthest away from it. And I love how Empire really takes that into high gear, while the Vader reveal changes a little bit of that perspective for him at the same time.
So you bring up the detachment kind of element of the Jedi philosophy, and this is something that you see, very much in that Dagobah scene where Luke, he gets this sense that his friends are in trouble, right? And he's told, right? Yoda, even I think Obi-Wan tells him, don't go. You have to finish your training. So would you say that in spurning the advice of his masters and sort of following his intuition, is he doing the right thing there?
Yeah, I actually had that question written down as well to discuss because, and I think it's an interesting slant, the story element that Darth Vader tortures his friends in the future without even asking them any questions. Han's like, they didn't ask me anything. I don't know why they're doing this, but Vader was doing it so that Luke would sense it in the past and come to face him there. Like it was a trap. He knew it was a trap. Yoda knew it was a trap. And he said, you're going to risk everything that your friends have fought for by doing this, but it's still difficult in the long run to think that Luke was in the wrong. He was acting rashly, but I think, and I do guess it was sort of a bit of a failure. He lost his hand. He nearly lost everything, but he didn't. And if we're going to take a Christian view of the whole situation, everything played out as it was meant to, despite his rashness.
This actually goes into some of my critiques of the Jedi in the prequel films. I think that even at this stage, Lucas had some of these ideas of no attachment baked into the old idea of the Jedi, and Luke, being the first of the new Jedi, is supposed to be a reformation. And I do think it is kind of a Catholic to Protestant Reformation type of thinking about being a Jedi. And I think that the only way that Obi-Wan and Yoda are right, that Luke risks everything that Leia and Han are fighting for, is if he falls to the dark side. And the thing that makes him most vulnerable to falling to the dark side is their lies. Their refusal to tell him the truth that Vader is his father is why he almost falls. And so I think that it's interesting looking at it from the perspective of the prequels, and I don't think that's necessarily an illegitimate reading, because I do think Lucas developed these ideas into the prequels of this too detached Jedi perspective that Luke ultimately rejects. When we get to Return of the Jedi, we'll talk more deeply about this. But here, he's so committed to his friends that he rushes to save them. And I agree with David. I don't think that he's wrong. Rash, yes, but not wrong.
So is he wrong for for disobeying Obi-Wan in Yoda? At the end of the day, no, because he still had respect for them, even when he thought that they were, wrong, a certain point of view. But later on in Return of the Jedi, right, he outright says, I'm endangering the mission, right? That is a reference back to a little bit, I think, to considering what his presence might do for the work that everybody else is trying to accomplish. So he has a reverence for them. He doesn't spurn them, I don't think, necessarily just to spurn them. You know, but if you have a strong enough conviction in the right things, I think that allows you in some certain situations to take risks that some people think are greater than the risks the way you perceive them, if that makes sense.
I think it makes sense, though I do wonder, and I'm not trying to necessarily argue that Luke is in the wrong, but I think that argument can be made, so I think it's worth at least discussing that um, certainly I would say that there is a place for maintaining fidelity to the institution that you've placed yourself within, where our radical, very, democratic kind of impulses of, every vote's just as equal. And so if I think that a certain path is right, then I should follow that path. That, that itself, I think, can be very dangerous. Maybe even if you're in the right, like sometimes it's dangerous, I think, to break those ties of, that student teacher bond. And so how do we balance out our personal conviction with the subordination that we owe to those that we've placed ourselves under? And this might be a good question even for, some of our ministers here.
Well, I mean, this is clearly, and I think Jordan would agree, a fourth commandment issue, especially in light of Luther's explanation that we should honor our parents and other authorities. And, we have the institutions of the church, and, we do well to respect the law as it is given to us, because, again, another Lutheran saying, the law works as a curb, mirror, and guide to guide our life in faith in the way that we love God and love our neighbor. And so, what game are you playing if you try and step outside of, of those lines, especially, if you do so in a way where you don't fully know and understand what it is that you're doing, as you could argue Luke is in this case. Um, I mean, Star Wars here is an analogy, and every analogy breaks down somewhere.
Yeah, I think that at best, and I think that's how we're meant to understand it, it's questionable. And I don't know that, Lucas or, whoever's involved in putting this story together, I don't know if they necessarily intend for us to walk away with any like any solution to this problem other than to say, the force works the way the force works, and it all worked out in the end. But I don't think it's entirely cut and dry whether or not Luke in fact did the right thing.
It might be also that, and I don't know if this was actually intended in the movie either. I know very little about the history of the movie and the technical aspects that have been brought out, but it seems to me that the muddled nature of this question kind of contributes to the sort of Luke's overall story arch, where he's, again, like I said, kind of this naive, boyish moisture farmer, and then kind of begins this descent into almost to the dark side, and that confusion, that lack of clarity, I think, in this question specifically, does kind of bear some of that out.
I think that's a good point. I think that the lack of clarity here is it's a critical part of the story that's being told here. That, as was brought up, the first film, The New Hope, it's very bright. It's very hopeful, right? Like things are on the rise. Like the darkness is being pushed away, and things are going the right direction. And then Empire Strike Back, suddenly everything is just going wrong. And this is something we can probably all relate to in various ways when something that you've been relying on is just taken away. Maybe something critical, like the things that you feel like your life is built on are suddenly crumbling. And now you're left wondering, where am I? Where do I go from here? Surely we've all experienced some kind of tragedy, some kind of suffering that puts us in that sort of position. And so I think we can kind of sympathize with that. And then on a very Jungian, Campbellian kind of direction with this, it's when the good guys are being essentially pushed down to the underworld, where now we have to go into the unconscious and kind of develop a better understanding, kind of build ourselves up again of who it is that we are. And that's, I think, fundamentally what the whole Dagobah scene is all about. It's all about Luke descending beneath the rational and operating in this kind of liminal space, and then just seeing where he emerges from there. I think that this can be approached from a perspective of Carl Jung or even Kierkegaard when he talks about this. that the things that most define the direction that we go are not nearly as rationally understandable, comprehensible as we tend to think that they are. That there's a lot that goes into our desires, the things shaping the things that we want, the things shaping the ways that we think that we're simply not aware of. And so that's why Dagobah itself is so murky. It's a swamp. It's not clear what it is that he's looking at. In fact, it's not even clear who his enemy is as he looks at Vader, this vision of Vader, and he sees himself. That he's really descending into this very liminal, very Jungian kind of space here, and then out of that, he's just emerging in a direction. And so I think that sort of death and recovery element here is significant, and I think that does feed into the ambiguity of this very problem. And this continues with even like Han Solo, getting frozen in carbonite. Carl Jung talks about this archetypal story of the trickster entering into stasis, and with the trickster in the stasis kind of removed from the story for a time, the other more serious players are now forced to deal with things in a more serious kind of way because they no longer have the trickster with them. And so we definitely see that sort of playing out very, I think, vividly in the story when the trickster character literally goes into stasis. And so much of this film is just about getting pushed down to somewhere you can't understand and then just seeing where you emerge. But of course, the good thing is that in this story, it's a story that's ruled by providence, and so the good guys inevitably end up in the right place, even if it's not entirely clear how they got there. And so, to that extent, I think that backs up the claim that this is a very Christian-leaning story, regardless of what Lucas necessarily intended. I think that is the most comprehensible way to understand it.
Can I
Yeah.
sort of back up that notion a little bit? So when the first movie of the sequel trilogy came out, so this is 2015, The Force Awakens, everyone was comparing it to A New Hope. They're like, it's pretty much just a cookie cutter. We're blowing up the Death Star again, only this time it's a whole planet, But something struck me as I was rewatching this, which is that in some ways it actually is a little bit of an echo of this film. And the reason I say that is because in both The Empire Strikes Back and The Force Awakens, you've had an audience that has gone through a period where they assumed at the end of the previous film that we've had our happy ending and everything's nicely tied up in a bow. In the case of The Force Awakens, we've been waiting a long time since the Return of the Jedi and all that happening. And what we find out in both films is that actually no, evil has shifted and it's come back, and evil always comes back. And it's just, you just keep fighting, and it's like baked in. And what does this make us think of? But Tolkien. Okay, so this is Tolkien's idea of we're fighting the long defeat, and Morgoth gets defeated, but then Sauron's going to rise up, and no matter what you do, because the in Christian terms, the sin is baked in, you're always going to constantly have this happening. And that makes me think about the fact that while a lot of people have made the comparison between the evil empire in Star Wars with the Nazi empire, and certainly in terms of like the uniforms and everything, there are a lot of echoes of that. These films came out in the middle of the Cold War, or at least when the Cold War was still very active. Ronald Reagan becomes president in 1981. And at that time, in the first year or two of his presidency, the threat of nuclear war seemed to be like skyrocketing because his rhetoric was so strong compared to what previous presidents had been. And when I look at these films, I always think, are we supposed to think that the evil empire is the Soviet Union? Probably a lot of people who saw the movies back then, and I mean, maybe David could tell us, would have sort of made that connection. I mean, Reagan comes out and he calls the Soviet Union the evil empire. He says he wants to put Star Wars style missile defense in the United States. But what's very interesting is, so, not too long after Return of the Jedi, the Soviet Union does collapse. And we have this period of about 10 years where it's a new world order. And we think everything's great. And Russia's a democracy now. And we put that whole issue to bed. We finally, yay, the freedom won. The United States won the Cold War. But now, of course, we look and we say, oh, that was just like this brief little respite. And now, it's been another 25 years of building tension till now. I mean, I don't know, with Trump in office now, maybe things are a little different, but basically it seems like Russia is going to continue to play that kind of slightly adversarial role to the United States. It's weakened, but it's come back in a different form. It's not communist anymore, but it's still a foe of sorts. And, that just plays in that same idea that I feel the more and more as I get older that we are kind of fighting the long defeat. And, that's in Star Wars as well. I mean, good grief. They dragged Palpatine down this incredible shaft, and then the whole Death Star blew up, and Palpatine comes back. I mean, how does that even happen? That shouldn't have happened. But it's kind of like what Oscar Isaac's character, O'Dameron, is like, somehow Palpatine came back. Yeah, we don't know how he Houdini'd his way out of that one, but it does feel like that way. And sometimes it's like, wait, how are we on planet Earth falling for these same lies again? That it's like every generation has to fight the same battle. And that is a very Christian idea, much more than the Eastern idea. I mean, there's so much Eastern mythology in Star Wars, but they can't get away from certain Christian ideas, as well as the idea in this film that the evil might not really be the Empire out there, but it might be within Luke, his own, tendency toward evil. That sort of, you could look at it as an Eastern idea that there's always some bad and good, some light and darkness mixed together, or you could look at it as a Christian idea. Actually, we all have that tendency, just like, the Ring and Tolkien's books. It all comes together.
Yeah, we've talked about that before, that typically Star Wars is framed as strictly like some kind of Zen Buddhist tale, or the very Eastern philosophical mindset, and that's certainly there. I don't know the mind of George Lucas and all the people involved in making these stories, but looking at the product itself, I mean, it's far easier. It makes more sense to frame it as a Christian story, or at least a story that moves in the direction of Christianity. In that, the dark and light, it's not yin and yang. You have the Force and you have the dark side, which is like a misuse of the Force. It deals with bent people, not so much a mixture of the dark and the light. And as far as this idea of evil constantly coming up, I mean, yeah, Tolkien talks about that in one of his letters when he says, while everybody's looking at Hitler or Stalin, there's some darkness festering in the corner that nobody's looking at, and that's what's going to be the next major threat. And so there's always something that's just around the corner. And so, I mean, I guess there's some symbolic reality to the somehow Palpatine returned, as much as I don't like that as a story element. Something like Palpatine can return. I don't want Palpatine to return.
There's well, Ian probably knows better than I do, but he can speak to it.
Well, I hate to be that guy, but unfortunately, Palpatine returning is a story element that they used in 1991 in the comic series Dark Empire, and so I don't like either Dark Empire or The Force Awakens or any of the Disney sequels, but I think there is a truth that is very Christian, that part of evil is seeking to live together, to live forever, to put yourself as God. Palpatine is the apotheosis of this mindset that I will have unlimited power. I will be God. And so even though I think that both times the story was poorly written, I think conceptually that is what Satan does, and that what every human sinful act is an act of rebellion and saying, I am God, and the true God is not.
Yeah, and it was clones. Long story short, in that Dark Empire comic, it was the idea that if you were a Jedi, that it would lengthen your life from this basically, well, righteous living sort of a thing, and that the corruption of the dark side artificially aged Palpatine, so he had these clones and could somehow transfer his soul into a new clone as his body aged out. But yeah, that's no longer canon, although kind of canon because they really sort of did put that into the sequel trilogy. But when Luke is on Dagobah, Yoda kind of gives him his Jedi gospel presentation, saying, "My ally is the Force, and it's a powerful ally." And he says, "Life creates it, makes it grow, and it's between you and the rock and the tree and all that stuff." So it's a little pantheistic. But then when Luke asks him if the dark side is stronger, he quickly says no, but he says it's quicker, it's busier, and it's more seductive, which I always thought was a very Christian and almost like a screw tape letter sort of a concept there.
Right. Yeah. The dark side is good for the power grabs. I mean, I feel this in like talking about any of the Star Wars games, right? It's always more fun to play dark side because they get the cooler powers. But um, it's a very Christian idea. It's a very Tolkienian idea that those who most grasp for power are those who are most grasped by power. And the Sith have this obsession with living forever, right? This is the Darth Plagueis idea, the Sidious idea. This is really what he promises Anakin in the prequels. But we're trying to steer away from that. But I mean, it's still the same idea is certainly present here. The idea that I just want to, as Ian said, essentially become God. That is the Sith dream. And Tolkien says in Letter 183 that the fundamental conflict in Lord of the Rings deals with God's sole right to divine honor. Like that's what the story is about. That's what Tolkien says. That is the conflict between good and evil. Do you recognize and glory in God's honor, or do you seek to grab it for yourself? And yeah, and we see exactly that as you grasp that power, you grasp by power, and in so doing, you actually become less free in your pursuit of radical autonomy. And so I think that Star Wars does a great job of demonstrating these pretty sophisticated, very Christian, very Tolkienian, very Augustinian philosophical ideas. Yeah, David, go ahead. Reverend David.
So, the thing when we're talking about Star Wars that is missing here, we get the Sith side from it, wanting to live forever, certainly, but that's always in the physical world, or as we would call it, the temporal sense. What is missing is the other side of it, which is more of the eschatological part of the discussion, the view of eternity, a time when the temporal world, ends, or as we would say, the end of the consistent evil or sin that exists in the temporal world. And that would be a totally interesting thing to read in a book or see in a Star Wars movie, kind of where the Jedi would see eternity in a sense. Is there a final end to evil?
Yeah, I mean, other than Jedi Force Ghosts, I don't know if they really reveal any kind of eschatology. It would be interesting to consider, but you're right that the Sith are fundamentally concerned about life in the here and now. It's very much the fall of Numenor that what we want to do is we want to latch on to the Undying Lands, but of course in so doing you find yourself dragged down into the abyss.
Well, the Jedi become more powerful after they die, right? Because they can become like a Force ghost, and isn't that what Obi-Wan said? Strike me down, and I'll become more powerful than you could possibly imagine. So, maybe that's their eschatology. Although I
But
don't
that
have
was
a
a
real,
lie.
yeah, I don't have a real sense of what exactly they do in the ghost world. But yeah.
Wow, Ian he really is hard on Obi-Wan.
Obi-Wan is a subjectivist who says that believing in absolutes is an evil thing. Therefore, I am against him.
Well, okay, it's debatable what he's saying there. We'll get there when we get to the prequels. But I actually defend some of the from a certain point of view stuff as much as I am an anti-subjectivist. I am not a postmodern live your truth kind of guy. But at the same time, I think that there is there's a time and a place for revealing certain portions of the truth. Like for example, sometimes my 3-year-olds will ask me questions, and I'm careful about what it is that I say to them because there's some things that are true that they're just not ready for. And so sometimes I need to condition what I'm revealing to them and the way that I'm revealing things to them, not because I'm like trying to keep them from the truth or just impose my subjective viewpoint, but because like they're literally just not ready for certain truths about the way that things are. And I think that in a teacher-student relationship, like there's a time and a place for that. Now, anyone is fully welcome to criticize Obi-Wan for saying, okay, maybe you should have just come out and said that, yeah, your father's Darth Vader. But at the same time, like that's a big thing to drop on somebody. And technically speaking, I don't think what he said was wrong, or I guess not maybe not technically speaking, but well, from a certain point of view, that the real person who is his father, like the reality of this entity, is Anakin Skywalker. Darth Vader's a perversion of what it is that he's supposed to be, and so I don't think it's necessarily wrong to say that his sin consumed the person. Um, so there's my defense of Obi-Wan's uh, dance with the truth.
Yeah. Do you ever keep anything from your kids because you might need it as a plot twist later on? I'm just curious. But the Obi-Wan series, whatever you think about it, actually tried to tighten that up a little bit because Darth Vader says to Obi-Wan in that you didn't kill Anakin, I killed Anakin, which I actually thought was a pretty great moment in that series. But
Yeah, I agree. It's a good job of it was very kind of him to relieve Obi-Wan of that burden. uh, yeah, Jordan asked in the chat if there are Sith ghosts in the wider legendarium. Well, they are in the Old Republic. I don't know if we how we relate that to the movies, canon wise, but although in the last Star Wars movie they did technically canonize Darth Revan, so I guess we can pull it in. Well, yeah, David.
oh, I was just thinking about other points and how I do like it's kind of a classical tale the way they set it up. Like Luke is on the brink of death in the wilderness and he sees a vision telling him to go on a quest to find this hermit to teach him more. I think it's a wonderful setup. And the part in the cave where he's hanging there and he uses the force to pull his lightsaber to himself. I think it's kind of lost on people that we didn't know the force could do that when he did that. I mean, Darth Vader had choked someone remotely a little bit, but we hadn't seen the Force used in that way. I mean, Obi-Wan had made people hear things and say, change their mind and whatnot. But that was such a powerful moment to me as a little kid. And that's another one, and this isn't philosophical or theological at all, but it's another addition in the later releases of the movie that I think is a mistake. It's a small mistake, but showing the Wampa, cutting to the Wampa chewing on the Tauntaun in the other room does not improve that scene. It's always better to not show the monster. It's better for us to be stuck with Luke, wondering what's going on and how much time we have and hearing vague noises instead of just showing him chewing on some stuff and then going, huh, and coming in there. Like I feel like that kills some of the drama of that scene, but I don't know. I guess it's neither here nor there really. But I believe there's more than three Star Wars movies, but I think my original Laserdisc set is the best way to watch these three.
Well, I still love the special editions.
I do too. They have certain things that they add a lot, like some of the Cloud City things, just when they're able to make the scale more grand than they were able to do in the 70s and 80s. I totally get it. But yeah, when they put in scenes that should have been deleted, it's a little frustrating.
Very fair.
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, I don't have the experience of watching it as it's coming out, but that surprise that the Force works in that way. Because you're right. I mean, up to that point, we've only really, I mean, other than Vader choking someone, we've only really seen the Force work kind of psychologically. We haven't seen it have much play on the physical world around us, which it's a good setup, I suppose, for what Yoda says about how the Force is everywhere and unites all things. It's not just a cerebral, psychological, spiritual thing. I mean, I guess it is, but that extends beyond persons. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
And then Vader does the same thing in this movie, and it's a pretty powerful scene, where they're with Lando and think everything's great, and then they open the door and Darth Vader's standing there, and Han just immediately draws his blaster and tries to shoot him in the face, and Vader just takes it out of his hands and is like, "Have a seat." And so, but yeah, I hadn't really thought about the parallel of Luke and his father both retrieving something with the Force, one much more easily than the other in this film.
It's like a proto Matrix scene of stopping the bullets. Yeah, is there anything else anyone wants to bring up here? That I feel like there's probably more on the table, but yeah, I don't know what you think.
I do want to kind of talk about what Amy mentioned earlier about all the Eastern stuff, because this, I would say, this movie probably has the most of the Eastern philosophy explicitly articulated until we get to the prequels. But I think that you can still see some of that Christian truth, like the idea of luminous beings. Are we? I mean, in one sense, you could take that to be kind of Gnostic, because Yoda says not this crude matter. But I don't think, again, I think that there is a lot of evidence that Yoda and Obi-Wan are not necessarily reliable narrators, or their philosophy is not necessarily supposed to be completely endorsed by the movie. Even if you don't go as far as I do and say Obi-Wan's just a liar.
Yeah, I
Yeah, and
think.
it. Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, Andrew. I'm always talking over you.
No, no.
I was just gonna say, yeah, the luminous beings are we, not this crude matter thing. I mean, on the one hand, as Christians, we don't believe we are simply crude matter, but we don't believe that the flesh, like we were created to be spirit and flesh together. And the hope of the Christian in the end is not some spiritual existence, it is a perfected physical reality. So yeah, I that is a little different than what I think Yoda was espousing.
Yeah, it's hard to fully redeem that line from a Christian perspective. Now, I mean, in these discussions, there can sometimes be a fine line in the rhetoric between describing something that's just straight out Gnostic versus something that's very kind of Platonic or kind of Christian Neoplatonic in the Augustinian fashion. And so there are ways to go that route, but I think when he says crude matter versus luminous beings, we definitely seem to be moving in something like an Eastern or Gnostic, a very anti-material position that I think definitely moves in that direction. And yeah, I don't have much to redeem about that, but I think that you framed that about as well as we can.
There is one thing that has always been a question I had, is that how Yoda says to Luke, remember your failure at the cave. And I didn't see how his experience at the cave could have been a success or a failure, just seemed more like some kind of a little, vision quest that Yoda had sent him on. He told him not to bring his weapons, and he just kind of rolled his eyes and took them anyway. But it just doesn't seem like a failure to me. I know in the larger fiction, and he says that place is strong with the dark side. And then in like the Heir to the Empire books, that was explained that that's why Yoda went and hid there, was because then that his light was kind of evened out with the dark and he couldn't be sensed. But still, does anybody have any thoughts on why that was a failure?
Maybe it's because the conflict wasn't meant to be physical first and foremost, and so in engaging in combat versus well the redemption the redemption quest he ultimately engages in, like maybe that's why it was a failure because he tried to fight power with power essentially. That'd be my best reading of it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's definitely it. Yeah, that he sees Vader in there, and his immediate move is just to draw his lightsaber.
And I mean, continuing with this dealing with your own shadow idea that I think is very much the forefront of this Dagobah scene. I think it's just he still is externalizing the problem at that point. He hasn't yet dealt with his own darkness, which is what he was there to do. You can't deal with the external threat until you've dealt with the internal.
And part of why he can't deal with it is, in my opinion, because he has been lied to. He doesn't know the truth of his father and his heritage.
Well, to be fair, if he searched his feelings, surely he would have known it to be true himself.
I just don't buy that.
uh, yeah, and this is way off the rails, but in the God of War from what was it, 2016, there's a similar sort of a theme to the point that you're making, Ian, and how keeping the truth from his son is having a negative effect on him. That at some point, someone needs to understand and know their real nature in order to respond correctly. So I can see that.
I have one thing. So just thinking about the cultural impact of this movie. So I thought I had done a good job of shielding my kids from knowing that Darth Vader was Luke's father. That I wanted to give my kids the experience that the original viewers of the movie had, in just kind of the shock and surprise of the reveal. And when we got to it, I was like, I'm like sitting on the couch, kind of watching them, and Vader says it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, we've heard this before." I mean, and the, we don't watch a lot of TV at our house. I honestly don't know how they knew, but just the idea of the how pervasive this movie is in our culture, that I think even people who don't know Star Wars know that the basic facts, that there's a dark side and a light side, that Vader is Luke's father, that it just shows you how deep in the marrow this movie is in the West. And I think that's kind of an impressive feat if you consider a movie that is now, I don't know, 40 some odd years old. It's really kind of an amazing thing.
Yeah, it's really entered into just our collective unconscious. And I don't know, Jordan, why do you think that is? Why do you think it's permeated the culture so deeply?
So, as we were kind of discussing some of the earlier stuff about, the mythology of other religions and stuff like that, I think it goes back to the discussion we had a lot of times with the Lewis stuff, that all good mythology ultimately is pointing us to the myth that became fact in Christ. And Lutherans are fond of saying that, even, stuff that was written by, non-Lutheran, hymn writers and theologians before the Reformation, we call that stuff ours, because it's the truth. And in the same way, this movie is such it hits all of the right mythology notes, that it's embedded in the one true story, or the one true story is embedded in it, I guess I should say. That and I think that's why it has just seeped into absolutely everything in a way that, I would say that I'm a bigger Star Trek fan than I'm a Star Wars fan, and Star Trek has just not had that same cultural impact, because I don't think it does the same. It doesn't tell the same great story that Star Wars does.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that, and echoing it a bit. I referenced last time this quote from Campbell, and very much pulling on Jung, where he says that something like a myth is like a public dream. It's something that we all attach to, but in an external kind of way that, well, dreams proper are individual. The myth is that dream that we all kind of share, and that what that means is that a myth that a compelling myth, a good myth. We're talking about the mythology of the ancient Greeks and Romans or whoever, or we're talking about a modern myth like Star Wars. Good mythology speaks to certain truths about human existence, which ultimately are like, truly contextualized within the story of Christ, of the true myth, as you said. And so I definitely agree that what makes Star Wars so compelling is that there's something real there, something that points to the real myth, the true myth, the myth that became fact. Um, so good, well said. Anybody have any other thoughts before we wrap it up? I don't want to cut anyone off, but we don't need to go on indefinitely.
Well, we hadn't talked at all about, and it was, it's always been a big deal, the whole do or do not. There is no try, that the emphasis on belief being what gives the Jedi the ability to do what they do, and that it's not about the stature of the person wielding the Force, which I don't know if that is like a reason why they made Yoda such a small little guy. I mean, it probably just works great for the little uh, swamp hermit anyway. But and how Luke is just blown away that he's able, even after everything he's told him, Luke is blown away that he's able to pull his ship out of the swamp, which Yoda's so frustrated because he's trying to tell him that it's not that big of a deal. I don't know. I mean, obviously we place value on belief, but it's not in the same way I think that it's being portrayed in the film. Do you guys feel that way?
Faith the size of a mustard seed can move an X-wing. No,
That's
I,
true. That's true.
I think my agreement with you, David, is that there just seems to be so little content to the faith that is behind a Jedi's power. Like the content of a Christian's faith is the person, works, and teaching of Christ, and of course, the fulfillment of the Old Testament. So you have, your 66 books of learning, and that is what we hold most dear in our faith. It's not in fact, is the opposite. The Bible says the heart is desperately wicked, whereas the Jedi's idea seems to be. You can kind of nuance it and make an argument, but I think that from the movie, what we get is the heart is what we should follow. Trust your feelings. There just seems to be so little intellectual and spiritual content to the faith that a Jedi is supposed to have versus what a Christian is supposed to have. So I do struggle with that. I mean, there's no way I would ever be like a Jedi in religion because I'm a Christian, but I do see Jediism or the Jedi philosophy as being at odds with Christianity in some of those ways.
That makes sense because the faith that Yoda's telling Luke to have is in his ability, not our faith in the finished work of Christ is what can move mountains. It's not, I'm so great. It's in what Christ has done for us. So, yeah, well said.
yeah, it does definitely strike me as blab it and grab it prosperity kind of prosperity gospel of just I believe it hard enough and therefore blessings can come my way that Joel Osteen approach.
Creflo Yoda.
Yeah, I don't think that's I don't find a great way of redeeming that, but that does seem to be what is being said. It's just faith in faith rather than faith in something substantial. Man, way to move us toward a downer at the end.
I mean, it's just like the movie itself, right?
That's right.
Oh, oh, so that was a good meta move there
Yeah,
in leaving us on a downer.
that's what I was going for. And that is one of the amazing things about the movie, though, is that it was like the first time that anyone had had enough faith in their audience and in the story they were telling to not really resolve anything substantial and to leave the audience waiting, knowing it's going to be 3 more years before they can see a conclusion to this story. I mean, other than, Avengers Endgame and whatever, I don't know many other movies that leave you with that sort of a cliffhanger.
I just still think it's hilarious that we get this dark, deep movie, the darkest, the deepest of the Star Wars movies. Um, and in order to tie us over, they give us the holiday special before this movie.
So you mentioned that the other day, and without having to watch the holiday special, as some of us have done, there's actually a pretty good documentary just about the holiday special that you can take in, and it's definitely better than actually watching the holiday special.
Well, we have much more Star Wars to discuss. Next time, in a couple weeks, we'll be talking about the Return of the Jedi, and so we'll get some consolation, get some redemption. But for now, I think we'll go ahead and leave it there. And so, thanks for joining us, and I hope to see you all, and maybe a couple more in a couple weeks. We're growing each time, and so by the end of this series, we'll have a Zoom screen full of people here. All right. Well, I'll see you then. Thanks for stopping by. All right, I hope that you enjoyed that. And again, if you want to support what we do, then there are really a couple ways you can do that. First, the primary way is to become a patron at patreon.com/mythicmind. Whether you want to get involved in our conversations or you just want to support what we do, patreon.com/mythicmind. Or you can leave me a one-time tip through the Buy Me a Coffee platform, when you can find a link to that in the show notes as well. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Be sure to keep up with all that we're doing across the Mythic Mind platforms. And so subscribe to the Mythic Mind podcast, Mythic Mind movies and shows, and Mythic Mind games. In the next episode of this podcast, when we talk about Return of the Jedi, will be released publicly on July 4th, as we're going every other Friday. And, as support increases, I would love to do this show and the game show every week, and maybe even more often than that. But again, I need your support to do that. But whether you are able to support us financially or you just want to keep up with these conversations, I welcome your company, and I'm really excited about the things that are ahead. But until next time, Godspeed.